First, I'll make the leaven, which is sourdough, and we'll use that in all three breads. The three essential breads are a country sourdough, a porridge bread, and a sprouted rye bread. First, we'll mix our doughs, and then we'll be dividing and shaping the dough, baking the dough, and then cutting the loaf. Then we're going to start with mixing the leaven. To make a leaven or a sourdough starter from scratch, you just start with flour and water, and you mix it together, and you keep it in a relatively warm place, and let it start fermenting over 3 to 4 to 5 days. And then you take a little seed of that and seed another batch with feeding it fresh flour and fresh water. My name is Chad Robertson. I'm the co-founder of Tartine, and today I'm going to turn these ingredients into our 3 essential breads that we make at Tartine Bakery. First, I'll make the leaven, which is sourdough, and we'll use that in all 3 breads. The 3 essential breads are a country sourdough, a porridge bread, and a sprouted rye bread. First, we'll mix our doughs, and then we'll be dividing and shaping the dough, baking the dough, and then cutting the loaf. Then we're going to start with mixing the leaven. To make a leaven or a sourdough starter from scratch, you just start with flour and water, and you mix it together, and you keep it in a relatively warm place, and let it start fermenting over 3 to 4 to 5 days. And then you take a little seed of that and seed another batch with feeding it fresh flour and fresh water until it starts to act very predictably. So we're taking the pre-existing sourdough leaven that's 1 hour to 2 hours from the last feeding, so it's pretty young. Break the sourdough up in the water first, and then add the flour and incorporate by hand. I add it in that sequence just because it tends to be the least messy when you're working at home with a little bowl. Just takes a few minutes to incorporate so you don't have any flour lumps. So we're going for something that would be considered close to a liquid leaven. It's a little thicker, and it's easy to stir with your hand. It doesn't really form a dough, but it's also not soupy. So I would say a pretty wet batter without any lumps in it. And once it's relatively smooth, you can let it rest. So I'll transfer the levain into a jar here, cover it, and keep it in a warm place, and we'll use it in the next couple of hours as we mix these doughs. Next, we'll mix our doughs, and we're going to start with the country sourdough.
Hollywood. Prepare to attack. Select your hero.
Science will reveal the truth.
Hello.
This is my kind of city. Lights, camera, action!
Attack commences in 30 seconds.
Let's get to it already!
Oh, yeah! Hello. Yeah.
Let's shoot for a new high score!
Hi. Hi. I want to play mine. My ultimate is charging.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attack commencing. Capture objective A.
Hey, Mahol. I'm restoring you.
Need healing.
Allow me to bear the back.
I am ready. Need a doctor.
There was a flaw in my approach. Your injuries are fascinating.
Bad guy.
Touch from afar. Regenerating the sound.
Time to raise my APM!
My ultimate is charging.
I'm restored.
Step right.
Repair the damage. Not yet.
Activating self-destruct.
It's been veiled.
I'm back in the fight.
Objective A captured. Escort the payload.
Hey, stop! I can use some healing.
Not ready. Surrender to my will. I'm under attack. This will restore you. Touch from afar. I will honor it. The payload really was outside. It was only double.
I could use Halo. Ready to roll.
This is my will. I'm under attack. Your strength fails.
Got us internet. I told you! I told you!
Surrender to my will.
The payload has reached
Let's
the
fucking run this, man.
The power of destruction. Allow me to repair the damage. Get into position.
My ultimate is charged.
New beginning.
My ultimate is
New
almost
thinking.
ready.
This is my will.
The payload is approaching.
We must all make sacrifices in the name of science. The power of destruction. The payload has been stopped. Must get it moving again. I cast this forth. Let's get you here,
Be there, Matsuyo!
Surrender to my will.
Seconds remaining.
Perhaps a new methodology is planned. Stunned. It appears we have suffered a minor setback.
Seconds remaining.
Time's running out! Everyone attack!
We must all make sacrifices in the name of science.
Overtime.
This will restore surrender to my will.
Round one complete. Score 2-0. Switching sides. Prepare your defenses. Select your hero.
Science will reveal the truth.
I grow tired.
Hello. Hey. Hey. Hey.
Attackers incoming in 30 seconds.
Gravity of this situation. A lovely day for field research.
The true struggle is for the superiority of ideas.
How y'all doing? Hello.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attackers incoming. Defend objective A.
Enemies in our orbit.
Somebody get me to
Allow me to repair the damage. Your body remains. This is my will.
Hello.
Double.
It's been
How y'all
there in
doing?
the cost.
Hey. How y'all doing? Hey.
Your power is mine. This will heal you.
Hello.
fourth. Repairing the damage. This will restore you. Allow me to repair the damage. I require healing.
Fire in the hole!
I require healing. I require.
Let's try that again!
We must all make sacrifices.
10 seconds
Science.
remaining.
Touch from afar.
It's the at your service. Hey,
Stop the payload.
how y'all doing? Hey. Hey.
I'm under attack. I cast this force.
Let's speak.
You seem to need of aid.
Give me time.
This is my will. I need healing. I require healing.
Taking off. How y'all,
I must reflect on this.
how y'all doing?
Touch from afar. I'm restoring. Allow me to repair the damage. I will unmake you. Regenerate. Surrender to my will.
60 seconds. The payload has reached.
There was a flaw in my approach. This is my will.
Hey. My ultimate is charged. Hey.
Go stop the payload. What you doing, Sigma? Right here. What you doing here?
Get into position. Not ready.
Get in there, Bob. Feel better. Ready to round it.
We've come forward. Allow me to repair the damage.
Got it.
seconds remaining.
Surrender to my will. This will improve your condition.
30 seconds remaining.
When faced
Because
with
I'm
Defeat. Play of the game. Double kill.
So mixing the country sourdough is essentially the same thing as mixing the leaven. Its timing and inoculation are different, and then it has the addition of salt. The country bread is a classic sourdough bread that we're known for and is pretty universally popular. It's sort of like a chocolate chip cookie. There's nothing challenging about it, but it's a really good bread and it goes with everything. The sourdough leaven serves a lot of purposes. One of them is adding gas as it's fermenting and gives you volume and lift and a light texture on the inside. The other thing is add a very distinctive flavor. The longer the rise up to a point, the more sort of layers and depth of flavor that you can develop. At Tartine, we start with a very young
Why
sourdough,
people like
meaning we don't
sourdough?
leave too many hours in between the feedings. We feed it quite
Why
often,
people like
so it
sour
stays
like
at a
that?
pretty young stage of growth, just to keep the acidity lower. Because
It's not
generally we
lemon
do very long
sour, but
final
it's
rises, and that
stinky
acid sort of
sour.
builds during that long final rise. So we want to start with as little acid as possible. This part of incorporating the ingredients is, there's no real trick here. I'm just trying to incorporate everything together as efficiently and cleanly as possible, and I just use my hand. You could certainly use spatulas and scrapers and things. So after we do that initial mix without the salt, we let it rest for about 15 to 20 minutes. The French have a term for this, it's called autolyse, and it's just leaving it to rest so that dough can start forming on its own. During the rest period, a few things are happening. It's starting to ferment, and the bacteria and the yeast are starting to multiply. At the same time, the starches are swelling, they're absorbing the water, and then the gluten strands are starting to align and develop. So we'll come back after 20 minutes and start to incorporate the salt into the dough, using a little bit of water to moisten our hand and to kind of help to dissolve that salt in as we cut and fold it into the dough. The salt will temper the fermentation and also tends to give you some strength in the gluten. It makes it contract in a way that you want, especially when you're making really high hydration doughs. So we're going to cover the dough now, and it's starting its bulk rise part of the fermentation, which is rising in one big mass of dough. During that 3 to 4 hours, we'll give it turns every 20 minutes to half an hour. To do those turns, we just fold the dough over itself a few times to continue to develop the strength and the gluten of the dough. Next, we're going to mix our porridge bread dough, which starts with cooking porridge, which is essentially making oatmeal. For our porridge, we use a blend of oats and purple barley flakes, and we do season it with a little bit of salt. Having those fully cooked gelled starches added to the bread dough at the end releases the bound moisture that's been cooked into that grain and gives you an extra moist bread that keeps for longer than a traditional bread without cooked grain. So the porridge acts as a very basic sort of natural preservative by just keeping the bread moister for longer. The main thing you want is to really have enough water there to gel all the starch as you're cooking it. So it's important that it's not super dry and that it's fully cooked. So once it's finally cooked, you're just going to want to spread it on a sheet pan or hotel pan. So I'm spreading the porridge out thin so it can cool. I'm going to set it aside for 20 minutes, half an hour. You could also do it a day in advance and just let it cool down. And next we'll mix the dough for the porridge bread. So the porridge bread is essentially a country bread with some added cooked grain to it. The one that we make at Tartine has a lot more whole grain in the basic dough, so that's a difference, but it's still, the technique is really the same, and you could certainly make a straight country dough and add porridge to it, which we've done many times. When I was learning to be a baker in the early 90s, there wasn't a lot of diversity in the grains that we could use in bread. We generally had, in the US, white flour and wheat flour to work with. And the porridge technique really sort of gave us a much more diverse palette of grains to use in the bread. So it was like going from black and white to color. Over the last 6 or 7 years, we've been working with grain breeders and farmers very closely to expand on the diversity of grains that we get to work with. And now we approach it in just the same way that we approach sourcing our carrots and our tomatoes and beef and everything else. We work directly with the people that are growing and raising these things, and it's made baking a much more interesting thing to do. I'll let this dough rest about 20 minutes. And by that time, the porridge will be cool, and I can add the salt and give the dough a couple of turns and then start incorporating the porridge. So you want to develop the dough a little bit before adding the porridge. When you're mixing by hand, it's sort of every time you give it a turn, it's getting more air and more strength and developing more. If you have to cut the porridge in by hand at the very end, when you're ready to divide it, it's going to sort of degas your dough in a way that you don't want. So add it earlier in the stage of mixing and then develop it very gently over the course of folding and turning for a few hours. So I've cut the salt in the same way for the country dough. And then we're going to add the porridge in. Again, just really trying to make sure that it's all incorporated so that I can let it rest and that dough formation can happen on its own. Once the porridge is fully incorporated, I'm going to set this aside in a warm place and let it continue to bulk ferment, giving it turns every 20 minutes to continue to develop the structure of the dough. Now I'll mix the sprouted rye dough, which we call René's rye. It's an homage to a chef named René Bolvig, who generously shared his recipe with me 6 or 7 years ago when I first started going to Denmark. There are more ingredients in this bread than the other two breads, the country and the porridge. Mixing this, you develop a little bit of structure from the minimal amount of flour in this bread, but really you're stirring to incorporate, and then you're kind of letting it ferment in bulk in a similar way, but you're not really developing too much gluten, as this bread is really like a batter, and it goes into a pan, and the pan is what gives it most of its structure. The liquids, again, going in first. We have some water, some buttermilk, dark beer, which is traditional in a lot of German breads, and all the alcohol bakes out, but you get a really nice flavor. A little bit of dark malt syrup, and adds a sort of toasted barley malt flavor, which is really nice in this bread. Again, the leaven goes into the liquids. Break it up by hand. And a couple of different kinds of flour. We're using a little bit of rye and a little bit of spelt. There's no really hard rule on that. You can use all different kinds of flour for your preference. Then we add the seeds in, sesame, flax seeds, pumpkin. Really everything just gets added, and you're going to end up with kind of a wet concrete-like batter. I mix everything together and then add the sprouted grains at the end. Again, just cutting them in by hand, scraping the sides of the bowl until everything's evenly incorporated. In the early stage, it's going to be pretty wet. It gets a little bit thicker as all the seeds and the sprouted grains start absorbing some of those liquids. Salt in the end. We don't really have to do an autolyse because the structure's not really solely relying on gluten development, so you definitely want to add everything in, make sure it's all moist. You could certainly give it an autolyse if you want, but it's not as critical of a step. So now we're in the bulk fermentation for our doughs, and we're going to be giving it the folds and turns to develop strength. You take the doughs from where they're resting, uncover them. I dip my hand in water, that way the dough doesn't stick to it so much, and just reach down underneath the dough and pull it over itself and turn the bowl and People have, again, different techniques and different sort of rituals of how many times they do it, but essentially you're just folding it onto itself, and it develops strength. It also gives you a chance, as you're making the bread, to feel how it's developing. Every time you give it a turn, you're affecting the fermentation, but you're also sort of checking in on the dough, and you have a sense of how fast it's going or how slow it's going, or maybe it's not feeling as like it's getting the strength that you want, and so you give it an extra turn. So you're sort of checking in on the dough. And these are our doughs after they've sat for 3 to 4 hours, a full bulk fermentation. Now we're getting into dividing and shaping the dough. Dividing is basically also weighing the dough from a larger mass, which is the bulk, into the individual pieces, which would be the final loaf size. And then shaping, the goal is always to achieve the final shape that you want after it rises. I dip my hand in water again, and then there's a little water on the table, and we just use the bench knife there, dough scraper, as kind of an extension of your hand, which really, you sort of need that when you're working with wet doughs, because it doesn't stick to the metal as much as it would stick to your hand. We do a gentle rounding using that bench knife, and the other hand sort of tucking the outer edge of the dough under itself while you're rotating it with your other hand in a circular motion. We use water on the table for dividing instead of flour for a lot of reasons. We don't want to incorporate more raw flour into the dough than we have to. Also, we're just trying to minimize the amount of flour that's in the air, because over time, bakers can develop allergies, and it's just from breathing flour all day. So we try to minimize that, and it makes a huge difference. That was the country dough. This is the porridge. Same exact process, basically. We try to not degas it too much. It's a pretty gentle rounding pre-shape, and try to use as few turns as we can to get it into the shape that we want. I didn't use a scale. As you can see, you absolutely could and should if you want to be really precise. I was just kind of eyeballing it here, and I also cut an extra 2 on each of them just to give a little more of a demonstration of how we do our pre-shape. But I'm actually only going to make 2 loaves with each of these doughs. So there's no flour on the table, there's no flour on the top, so it's pretty easy to just lay one on top of the other after they relax a little bit and make it into one loaf. This is the sprouted rye. It's pretty sticky, and when I say it has the consistency of wet concrete, it also sticks like wet concrete. So you want to sort of empty that out carefully into the pan, and then make sure to clean your bowls or whatever utensils you have that have that dough on it. The other 2 doughs will sort of dry and flake off. The rye dough will stick like glue, so you want to just clean that stuff quickly. The country and the porridge doughs get a gentle pre-shape, and then they get a final shape. This bread, it's very forgiving, so you just dump it into the pan and then smooth over the top with your hand, just dipped in some water so that it doesn't stick, and it's good to go until it's ready to bake. So with the country and the porridge, you want to give them a bench rest. If I try to shape these immediately, which you could do, they will be a little bit too elastic. You want to give them time to relax. In an ideal world, you're giving it 15 to 20 minutes rest, and then they're relaxed enough so you can do the final shape. So there's really nothing else to do for the sprouted rye bread except let it rise in a cool chamber overnight. So I'm going to take that away and cover it with something that can breathe a little bit and be ready to bake the next day. So in preparation for the final shaping, I'm bringing a little flour onto the table. See, I floured one piece. Since I'm combining them, I didn't flour the other one because I didn't want to put raw flour on the inside. We try to keep the flour just on the outside of the loaf as much as possible. Our shaping technique, you flip it over so the flour is on the underside, fold the bottom up, fold the 2 sides over sort of into a cylinder, and then start folding the tops and sort of stitching the 2 sides together. And then at the end, when you have this sort of stitched long piece, you fold it over itself. And then, you're basically just kind of strategically folding this thing into itself and then kind of leaving the seam on the underside. And careful to put the bread down to rest on the bench where there's no flour, because you really want that underside, which is a seam that you've just created. You want that to seal itself as it rests on the bench for, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. Shaping is, there are thousands of techniques all over the world for getting similar things and different things, and thousands of shapes of bread. But the goal is always to kind of achieve the final shape that you want after it rises. And for me, shaping at tartine, it's about leaving that air intact that you've developed over this bulk rise, the sort of gentle mixing and the gentle bulk rise. We don't degas the dough. We try to really keep all that air in there. It's not just because it gives you an open crumb, but because that's the gas that's come off of fermentation. So it has an aroma and it affects the final flavor, and we really want to keep that intact. So they're all shaped, but we let them rest a little bit again so that the seam seals on the bottom. Now that the doughs have sort of relaxed and rested on the bench, we're going to give them their final shape. At Tartine, we prep all the baskets in advance, flouring them with a mixture of rice flour and wheat flour. The rice flour just being pure starch, so it absorbs a little of the moisture, and the linen actually gets really moist. The rice flour helps the
Traveling
bread
to
not to stick when we're
Iconwell.
dumping.
Prepare your defenses. Select your hero.
Nu så.
Science will reveal the truth.
Show some respect. Hey,
Attackers incoming in 30 seconds.
Group up here. Hey! This is no time for standing around. Group up with me.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attackers incoming. Defend objective A.
Power grows.
I've got you.
Restore. This will heal you. Touch from afar.
I could use some assistance.
I need to recharge.
Hey, stop!
My
Let's
condition
get
is
you back in
improved.
the puck.
Your strength fades. Your contributions to the furtherance of science are to commend.
Hi!
Evolution works quickly.
I got no mind, no blocks.
I am ready to unleash coalescence.
Let me get you past.
Behind us. Shot him a couple times. Still not. Show him quick, show him quick. We need him.
Group up!
You seem in need of aid. Surrender to my will. Strength flows. This is my will. I am restored. Restoring.
Heya, join me!
Help me.
tactile visor activated.
Heroes never die for a price. This is not the
Bearing the damage.
group up here.
Regenerating the cellular structure. I will unmake you.
60 seconds.
Allow me to repair the damage.
Helden sterben nicht.
I pass this forth.
Dein Schutzengel ist da. Enemy revived.
Objective lost.
I must reflect upon this.
Join me.
This is my will.
Meteor strike!
Get into position. Your strength fades. Dear Shinigami. Power of destruction. Going to the Yeshu.
Group up with me. I group up here.
Do me stop right.
Like it.
That's much better. Allow me. You'll pay my whole. This will heal you. Understood.
It's just it.
I need to recharge.
Join me.
You gotta cast.
60 seconds remaining.
Join the Yeshu.
You want to retrace your window?
The power of destruction. This is my will.
Oh, you will. Okay.
Allow me to repair the
10
house.
seconds remaining. Overtime.
Hiya. Group up here.
Some bridge. On you.
My ultimate
That changes my physics.
Top right.
Meteor strike!
I will draw the strength An evolutionary day. Get into position. I'm under attack. I require. I will rebuild you. This will restore you.
Pulse bomb is charging.
Complete.
Just in time. My ultimate is charged.
Score 0 to 1. Switching sides. Prepare to attack. Select your hero.
Science will reveal the truth.
Hi. Group up.
Nothing to worry about. Unless there's something to worry about. As Dr. Liao always said.
Attack commences in 30 seconds.
Damage boost engaged. Hello there. Super.
The true struggle is for the superiority of ideas.
I'm with you.
Five, 4, 3, 2,
Join me.
1. Attack commencing. Capture objective A.
Touch from afar. I'm under attack. Like Lord. When faced with a setback, we must challenge our assumptions.
This is not the end.
Shit.
New beginning, new thinking. Allow me to repair the damage. Moving up.
Join me.
Distributing signals.
I don't think we go Tracer. Can't even get any damage.
Regenerating the cellular structure. Touch from afar.
That poor play that
I must surrender to my will. That's much better. Mercy is for the
I really don't want to Tracer. I don't understand why.
my will made real. Injured again. I'm under attack. Your perhaps
30
a new
seconds
methodology
remaining.
required.
Alright, we have all the options.
We're running out of time.
Cease your resistance.
Heroes never die. For a price.
Surrender to my will.
It's crazy.
I'm not dead yet.
Oh, team. Literal worst Tracer ever.
Play of the game.
We have 6v5 and our ball fucking threat. For what? I don't understand.
Traveling to icon ready for battle.
You see, they done a fucking... They done a fucking Doom already. And he fucking fast.
Greetings.
Just for what?
5,
Iba Kaseki.
4, 3, 2, 1. Attackers incoming. Defend objective A. Greetings.
Fucking both back again.
Routine activated.
Jesus Christ.
It out the next day. So as you see, I'm picking these up, seam is up, and then you kind of fold the seam in on itself again, and that's one of the reasons you really need it to be sealing on a bench that doesn't have any flour. Those are the 2 country loaves, and then we roll the porridge in some rolled oats, or you can roll it in whatever you want, but we roll it in something that reflects what the porridge is made of. You could leave these baskets out at room temp and they'd be ready to bake in 4, 5, 6 hours. I really like a minimum of 8 to 12 hours. And to do that, you need to have a cooler chamber than room temp. So we take all these baskets and they go into climate-controlled boxes, and it makes it more digestible. It develops a lot more flavor during that final rise, and you really want them to be kind of that point. So these doughs have gone through the long, slow, cool rise overnight. Finally, it's time to bake these breads. So we preheat the Dutch oven to 500 degrees. Add some rice flour on the top of the loaf, which is pretty moist and sticky at this point, and we just don't want it to stick in the pan. Carefully invert that bread into the Dutch oven, and then score it with a knife or a very thin double-edged blade, which is what we use. Carefully, again, get the lid back on, and then place it into the preheated oven. So the Dutch oven just creates a sealed chamber inside of the larger oven, and that creates a steam-saturated environment around the loaf of bread, which is what you want. It's what you want in the beginning of the baking process so the loaf can expand, but it won't caramelize until you take that top off 2/3 of the way through the bake and let the steam escape. And now it's going to start browning and caramelizing and developing those flavors and colors and the crust that you want on a deeply caramelized loaf of bread. So once the bread is baked, the crust is formed, and you're getting the color that you want. I like mine dark golden brown. You want to tip the loaf out of the Dutch oven onto a wire cooling rack. Any kind of a rack works as long as there's air circulation and the crust doesn't get soggy. Porridge is the same baking technique as the country, so add some rice flour to the bottom of the loaf so it doesn't stick, because you're going to invert it into the hot Dutch oven carefully. This one has the grains on the outside and it's hard to get the blade through it, so I use scissors for the same effect. It's just a different way to score. A few different purposes of scoring. It's, everyone says it's a baker's signature. People score differently, but really the loaf's going to rise and sort of blow in the oven as it's expanding, and it's forming a crust at the same time, so you're basically just determining how that's going to happen. Different bread traditions have different ways of doing that, and we just do one long cut because it's simple and it can come out very elegant if all other factors are working the way we want. Remove the lid 2/3 of the way through, just so you can start developing a real crust and getting some of that caramelization coloring by releasing the steam. So after 40 to 50 minutes, I would say, when the loaf has the color of the crust
Hi,
that you
cafeteria.
want,
What's
carefully
up?
remove the Dutch oven, tip the loaf out onto a wire rack to cool. So the sprouted rye just goes directly into the oven. At Tartine, we inject the oven with steam. You could spray a little water on top of this if you wanted to, but if it's moist, just put it in the oven. It's much denser than the country and porridge, and so I would say you want to bake this one longer than you think you need to, and if it's getting dark on top, or even before it starts getting dark, cover it with foil and bake it 10-15 minutes longer just to make sure that it's fully cooked in the center. Once the sprouted rye is fully baked out, tip it out of the pan and place it on a wire rack to cool. These are the final loaves, cooled and ready to cut: country, porridge, and sprouted rye. I've been making bread and cooking for over 25 years, and I started because I thought that baking bread and cooking would mean that I could travel anywhere in the world and find work and feed people, and that I would always have food. And it's turned out to be all that and way, way more.
Man,
I
it's
tasted
so
what I
hard.
consider really good bread for the first time when I was 21, and I instantly thought, I need to learn how to do this. Now I'm sort of really trying to make this
So
kind of food more
thirsty.
available to more people and to give the next generation of bakers something to build on that's meaningful, and hopefully leave some ideas out there that people can build on and really move the needle.
Appetite.
To create a tender cut, I'm gonna cut against the grain. This would be for sushi. All right, so here I have a piece of salmon, and it's just a little bit easier to see the sinew lines in the salmon. Sinew is the connective tissue that is connecting the muscle fibers. Generally speaking, you can cut this in any direction and you shouldn't really feel the sinew too much. Getting Sorted asks, we have been making and eating sushi lately, but we can't get the rice right. What is your secret to perfect sushi rice? I have a bowl here of sushi rice prepared. One thing we want to make sure is that we're starting with the right type of sushi rice. Most commonly in American markets, you'll find a type of Japanese grain called koshihikari. It is a short grain Japanese rice, and that is most commonly used in sushi preparation. After that is really about washing process, is about releasing the starch. We want the rice to be able to stick together to form a ball, but we don't want it to be gummy and too sticky. If this is overcooked, you're gonna see that this is like a big mosh, and it's gonna look very, very moist and wet. And you'll see that the grains aren't individually distinct. And then on the other side, if this is undercooked, it'll look too distinct and it'll kind of flutter and fall apart versus, I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit of a stretch and they're kind of, dragging each other along. Understanding that, reading that to really focus in on and getting those fine details takes a long time to understand. Hot Toddy 24 asks, it was only right to get sushi on my last night in Cali because how fresh can it really be in Utah? Will you have fresh sushi in Utah versus California? Maybe it might be a day different, but also modern sushi chefs are using aging process. You might be thinking that it's fresh fish, but sometimes chefs are now aging toro, for instance, for up to 2 weeks and allowing kind of a natural fermentation to occur, obviously in safe environment and controlling bacterial growth. The idea there is to reduce the moisture content and increase the flavor and the tenderness by going through an aging process. Richard Chu asks, soy sauce question. Do you think putting soy sauce on everything, especially white rice, is faux pas? Personally, it makes me cringe when I see people put soy sauce on rice or dipping their sushi in gallons of soy sauce, but that's just me. Simply put, answer is yes, it is faux pas to put soy sauce on everything. If you're going to a high-end sushi omakase restaurant, omakase means, literally translates to chef's choice. And so generally this is a type of restaurant where you don't make any decisions except for maybe what you're gonna drink. Generally the chef is going to, basically manicure everything to the way chef wants it. So that would include the amount of soy sauce or seasoning that's put on every fish. If you are in a more kind of quote unquote casual sushi restaurant, you do have the option to have your own soy sauce and it won't come seasoned. But generally the idea here is if you put soy sauce all over the rice will fall apart and you won't have a beautiful piece anymore. It'll decompose just from being wet. Amelie Over asks, today while eating sushi, I told my boyfriend he's meant to eat the ginger between the different pieces and not on top of the sushi, and he snapped back. This is how they did it in Japan. And I've been thinking of it ever since. Have I been taught wrong? I think that, Amelie Over, you've been taught correctly. Sushi ginger is meant to be a palate cleanser between bites of sushi. There are certain pieces that work really well with sushi ginger. And I think that there's nothing wrong with it. But again, setting is important. If you're in a restaurant where the chef is serving you exactly how the chef wants it to be eaten, it would be very disrespectful to put that piece of ginger on top of that fish and enjoying it together. Cody Twist 1 asks, what is imitation crab even made of? Sushi is ruined. Imitation crab most often is made out of pollock. That's been turned into a paste, mixed with some sort of starch and some seasonings. Sometimes they use artificial crab flavor or maybe real crab juice. This is actually a Japanese fish product called surimi. In Japan, surimi products are not marketed as imitation crab. Vivu Rosa asks, what is temaki? So temaki directly translates to hand roll. I think most commonly is the cone shaped where you'll see kind of the ingredients sticking out of the top. And the idea here is to turn this corner into the side here and wrap. The nori stays crisp because it's so quick and easy to make. But also this style has become very popular to do at home. So generally if people are coming together and having a party at home, everyone is making temakis at home. Gaz Deves asks, question for sushi lovers. Am I supposed to eat this leaf? And if so, how do I do it using chopsticks?
No.
This is called shiso, or also known as oba. And yes, it is edible. It kind of has a minty, herbaceous flavor, and I love to have it just wrapped around a piece of sashimi. It adds a great different dynamic to the flavor of the dish. Nicole Kanahan asks, how do sushi chefs cut sushi rolls so perfectly neat? I don't get it. So it takes a lot of time, dedication, and practice. Most commonly in the beginning, when you first start learning how to cut, we go from center and cut it in half. Cut this in half again. And then on each side, we cut these in half. It's obviously much easier to see something bisected, something that's half, than to see and understand what one piece is. But as we advance, faster way is to cut this in half. And instead of cutting it in half again, just going from left to right straight, but this takes practice so that we understand each piece and how big it should be. And so generally, Japanese sushi knives we call yanagi, designed to be a little bit thinner behind the blade, and has the bevel, which is much more elongated to kind of create a thinner blade and easier to slide through. Ryan D. Jacobs asks, what kind of vinegar do you add to rice for making sushi? Sushi vinegar can either be made with rice vinegar or red vinegar called akazu. This is a vinegar produced from the lees of sake. This is kind of the residual byproduct of making sake, and then aged to create a vinegar. And through the aging process, it kind of turn to this kind of red color. And you'll often see now in higher end sushi restaurants the resurgence of akazu. And actually akazu now is more expensive than the rice vinegar. And the smell is very, very strong. And so this is actually associated with a kind of story of the apprentice waving, the sushi rice as the master is mixing the...
Traveling to Hanamura. Prepare to attack. Select your hero.
Science will reveal the truth.
No time for games.
20 minutes kill. Bro, 20 minutes kill.
Now traveling to Busan. Prepare for battle. Select your hero.
Nothing's gonna stop us.
I heard there's a nice reward for bringing you fellas in.
Try. What are you looking at? Keep up with it.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Round 1. Capture the objective.
Seemingly fade. Allow me to repair the damage. Tell me how this feels. I passed this forward.
The objective is in.
If we are to progress, we must claim the objective. Hello. Time restored. Up the tempo. my will.
Double kill.
Paladin.
Team kill.
Allow me.
Let's get patched up.
My will made real. Get into position. Prepare in the dust. When he holds a There was a flaw in my approach.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This will restore you. Going to the Yashi.
Move to the beat.
Restoring you. I need healing. This will heal you.
The dragon becomes me.
When faced, my ultimate is ready to be unleashed. Surrender to my will.
Double kill. First round. 1.
Speed boost. Oh, let's break it. Damn.
Thanks.
Score 1-0.
Strong memories.
I am ready. I will strike our enemies where they do not expect.
Nothing's gonna stop me. Move. Move.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Round 2. Capture the objective.
This is my will.
Bad guy.
The objective is now.
Perhaps a new methodology is required. Allow me. Get into position. Not dead yet. This will restore you. Spread it close. Push on. Bearing the damage. Allow me to repair the damage.
That's not right.
I require healing.
Need healing.
to my will.
Who's got the eye?
Not ready. This will improve your condition. Nor do I do This will restore. There was a flaw in my approach. Get into position. Allow me. Help me. I need healing. Overtime.
Step right up.
Victory is not a right.
Play of the game. Double kill.
Damn.
The rice with the vinegar. There's a lore that says that actually that akazu is so cheap and the smell was so pungent that the apprentice was there not to wave off and cool down the rice, but just to blow away the smell and the scent from the master. Susie Tobias asks, what are these teeny wee orange bubble things on the outside of my sushi? I like them. Fun to pop. I think that Susie Tobias is referring to tobiko. Tobiko is the roe from flying fish. This is, manufactured and this is created. There's flavorings in here. There's some food coloring in here as well. And one of the great things about this, I think, is that it has MSG in there as well. And so it actually adds as a great flavor booster to anything that you add it to. From DKD22, who invented sushi? Ha 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 ha. It's so good. So sushi that we know today, Edomae Sushi, is credited to a gentleman named Hanahao Yohei. This was around 1820, I would say. The original sushi was almost like fast food. This was originally done through basically street vendors. These were carts that carried around the rice and the fish and served on street sides. So people would come by, eat a couple pieces, and be on their day. Sushi_ebooks asks, what is your favorite slice of fish? I'm gonna assume and interpret that this question means what's my favorite piece of sushi. So I have here sea urchin. This is my favorite. This is actually the gonads from sea urchin. The sea urchin is kind of a round, spherical, hard-shelled creature with a bunch of spikes sticking out of it. Has a very subtle sweetness, nice ocean flavor. And for some people, it's an acquired taste. Amber Lynn asks, sushi question. Is a spicy tuna roll, tuna and wasabi, or tuna salad made with spicy mayo? Tuna and wasabi together we call tekkamaki, which is just tuna roll. Spicy tuna roll is referring to tuna mixed with spicy mayonnaise and then put into a roll. Big Neezy NFT asks, when did sushi in America become a cream cheese log slathered in mayo? Late 80s and into the 90s, there was a little bit of hesitation for, the non-Japanese consumer to have raw fish. And obviously cream cheese and mayonnaise, they do work in some types of sushi. I think it was just a great way and creative way to introduce sushi to a wider audience. As long as people understand that this is not traditional, chefs have the creative freedom to do whatever they want, I think. And at the end of the day, the consumers will decide if it's good or not. Okra Wind asks, how do sushi chefs not cut off their finger or something with all the sake and beer they drink? Practice makes perfect, I guess. This is a practice among sushi chefs. I think that it is nice for a guest to offer a beverage to the chef. And I think that this is really designed and was originally to build rapport, and it's more of like a friendly gesture. You're out with friends and you offer somebody a drink. I don't think that a sushi chef should be there behind the sushi counter getting belligerently drunk. I don't think that's appropriate. A responsible sushi chef should know when to say no. All right, that's all the questions. I hope you learned something. Until next time.
In the Pacific Northwest, and when that hop cone, that little flower grows out, that is where you're going to develop all your flavors and aromas. Now, here's an interesting fact. The hop is the nearest botanical relative to cannabis. This hop flower, you have resins, and those resins are giving you bitterness. They're giving you flavor, they're giving you aromas. Hops are varietal like wine grapes. There are about 100 varieties of hops available on the market right now. Some of them taste floral, some of them smell like citrus, some of them smell kind of dank. There used to be a lot of spices used in beer, but the hop became often the only spice in beer because it also acts to retard the growth of bacteria, and bacteria can spoil your beer. And so people started to notice the more hops you add, the longer the beer was going to last. And so hops became really the focal point for bitter beer flavors. At James241-47374 asks, how do you make beer without yeast? Sorry, James, you can't. You have to have yeast in there to ferment your sugar into alcohol and to make all the flavors that we associate with beer. You can use other things besides yeast, like bacterial strains, etc., but you gotta have yeast to get the job done. At Adzierman asks, is beer chemistry? Well, beer is chemistry. Beer is also biology. Beer is also art. Wine is easy, right? You got some grapes. Grapes have sugar. You stomp on them, whatever else, they might start fermenting by themselves, and you have wine. Beer is tougher. We're starting with this. There's no sugar in barley malt. You have to break down the starch in this into sugars, which you do in a porridge called a mash. The natural enzymes that are in the malt break the starches down to sugar. Then you have a formulation. Is it going to be dark? Is it going to be red because it has fruit in it? Is it going to be kind of a caramel color like that? And that's a bit more art. And then you have biology because you're going to add yeast, which is then going to consume those sugars and give off carbon dioxide, flavors, and of course, alcohol. There's also a lot of cleaning, a lot of plumbing, so you have to be ready to wear a lot of hats if you want to be a brewmaster. So, at Yuff Yaxon asks, how do you become a brewmaster? Because I feel that's an awesome job. Hashtag dream job. The brewmaster is essentially the chef of the brewery. There are two main ways you can learn to be a brewmaster. One is you take classes, sometimes for years, or you can do it the old-fashioned way, which is the apprenticeship. You basically attach yourself to another brewmaster, usually for years, and you slowly learn on the job. There are many, many jobs in each brewery, but in each brewery there's only one brewmaster, the same way that there are a lot of cooks in a kitchen, but there's only one chef. At the Smarmy Swami asks, does Jamaican Viagra really equal Guinness plus peanuts mixed in a blender? I don't think that would make me very frisky. I prefer my Guinness and peanuts separately. I don't know why you'd have to put them in a blender, but Guinness does have a reputation in the Caribbean and in Africa for giving people extra potency. I don't know if there's any truth to this. I just think it tastes pretty good. But there is a thing, especially with the stronger versions, the Guinness Foreign Extra Stout at about 8%, that's supposed to be really good for you. They think that it's an aphrodisiac and is going to give them special powers. I'm not sure. I just think it tastes good. At Biophilius asks, and is homebrewing illegal? No, but it was. So after Prohibition, people were really worried that there were going to be all these people fermenting at home and they were not going to be paying taxes. My grandfather was one of them during Prohibition who was making his own beer at home. In the 1970s, President Jimmy Carter signed legislation making home brewing legal in the United States. You can brew your own beer at home and you can drink it and you can bring it to your friends. The thing you can't do is sell it. You got to pay taxes, you need licenses, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, you can brew legally at home, but no, you can't sell it to all your pals. At Susan Orlean asks, is there such a thing as boxed beer? And if not, why not? No. And the why not is because carbonation. You need to hold the pressure in your container and a box doesn't really hold pressure. At Sparkly June asks, how do you make your own beer? Well, it's kind of like asking, how do you make your own pancakes, right? You can get a box mix, just add water, just add milk, or you can make pancakes from scratch. Kind of the same thing with beer. You can start off with a kit, but if you want to have more control, you're going to start here with the original grains. You're going to crush them, you mix them with hot water at very specific temperatures, about 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Activate the enzymes. You're going to break all those starches down into sugars. You're going to strain those sugars out, bring it to a boil. Now you have a liquid called the wort, W-O-R-T. You bring that to a boil, you add your hops, you cool the whole thing down, and you add the yeast. The yeast then is going to eat the sugars, give off carbon dioxide, give off flavors, and give off, of course, alcohol. Within a few days, you've got beer. I was an amateur brewer for years. We're going way back. I am 400 years old. I didn't like the offering of beer that we had in the mid-'80s at that time, so I started making my own beer at home. And it turned out my beer was better. At Reddit Beer asks, hey, Reddit Beer, what is the weirdest beer you've ever had? I've had all kinds of beers. One of the greatest beer experiences I've had, but the strangest in flavor, was drinking the traditional South African beer, Umqombothi, out of a communally passed sort of galvanized steel bucket outside of Cape Town, South Africa. And it was sour, it was funky, it had all sorts of stuff going on. It was made from sorghum, but this is a really traditional beer style. Beer was invented probably about 10,000 years ago. By the time you got to ancient Egypt, they had everything. They had beer styles, they had names, they had advertising. Old Egyptian cities like Thebes were actually built on beer money. The pyramids were built on beer money. So beer goes way, way back, starting in Africa and then spreading all over the world. At Greg Mercy Exile asks, question for Beer Twitter. Why do Belgian, German, and French brewers predominantly use glass, but in the UK, most craft and microbreweries use cans? Is it a case of cost versus tradition? In the old days, the only people who could afford a canning machine were the big brewers. So if you wanted to buy a canner, it cost over $1 million. As the craft beer movement started to take off, people making canning technology said, we should make some stuff for these guys too. And they started to make canners smaller, and the canning technology got better. It didn't affect beer flavor the way that it used to. The beer can eventually became, from a technological point of view, equal to the glass bottle. A lot of people feel that the can is more ecologically friendly. It goes more places that might not allow glass, like say a stadium. The Belgians don't use many cans, but in the UK and the United States, the can is really taking over. If we're using bottles, we put beer in a brown bottle. Why? Because a brown bottle is going to block a lot of the light coming in, but it can't block all of it. A can, however, can block all the light. And that is one way in which a can is actually superior to a bottle. These days, when run properly, both packages are pretty much equally good, even though I kind of feel better about a bottle in a certain way, but that's because I'm 400 years old. You know, I'm a traditionalist. At Lamb asks, how do you make beer from pumpkins? You cook the pumpkins, you mash them up, you mix them together with the grain in your mash. The enzymes from the grain break down the starches of the pumpkins into sugars, and you ferment the whole thing together. Often people will add some pumpkin spice because people like pumpkin spice, but pumpkin beer is actually hundreds of years old. At Hedvig Greymalk says, remember last year when the Republicans were crying that if Biden won, he'd make them drink plant-based beer? Well, you know, my beer was always plant-based. So that's one of those weird things like gluten-free vodka. Like vodka doesn't have any gluten in it. At Delboy1978 UK asks, how do beer makers keep their yeast going? how do you grow yeast? Yeast is one of the most important elements in beer. It is the agent that actually takes this sweet liquid called wort and transforms it almost magically into beer. And there are various types of yeast. The main one that we're using in beer is called...
Now entering King's Row. Prepare to attack. Select your hero.
Science will reveal the truth.
Ah, the sight of one of my finest kills. That day, I felt alive.
Attack commences in 30 seconds.
I'll enjoy the quiet while it lasts.
Hello.
Don't just stand around. Do something.
Greetings.
Reinvert
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attack commencing. Capture objective A.
Pass this force. No need to mess about.
The enemy approaches.
Heal me.
Your strength fades. This will heal you. I will floor. I require
Let's get you back in your fight.
No one can hide from my sight.
Objective A captured.
I'm restoring you.
Escort the payload.
Hello.
Hello, group up with me.
Payload is moving.
This will restore you.
Get them off me.
Regenerating your cellular structure. My will made real. I will unmake you. Surrender to my will.
Join me. Hello.
With the This is not your time. This I will. I require healing. I require. I need. Allow me to tear me down. My power grows. Your power is mine. This will improve you. I need healing.
Hiya! Hi!
This is not the end.
Touch from afar. I will unmake must all make
Sigma,
sacrifices in the name of science.
Observe the battle.
I'm restoring you. No one can hide.
This is not your power.
Touch from afar. I require
One after another.
Activating the barrier.
surrender to my will. The payload moves. Circle. Allow me to repair the damage. Regenerating your cellular structure.
The payload has reached the checkpoint.
The power of destruction. I'm under attack. Lights up. This will heal you. Not yet.
What is that melody? My barrier is destroyed.
Paula.
No one. Heroes never die.
It's time.
Surrender to my will. This will only hurt for a bit. When faced with a setback, we must challenge our assumptions. Allow me. My will made real.
What's the hold up?
60 seconds remaining.
This will restore you. This will improve your condition. I require assistance. I need to recharge. Tell me how this is touch from afar.
30 seconds remaining.
I will rebuild you. What time we have is fading.
Tactical visor activated. What is that melody?
Shohei hold. I need to recharge. Restore you.
10 seconds.
This will heal you.
Heroes never die.
Surrender to my will. This is my will.
This is not your time.
Round 1 complete. Score 2-0. Switching sides. Prepare your defenses. Select your hero.
Science will reveal the truth.
Hello there.
Empty your mind.
Attackers incoming in 30 seconds.
Group up here. Hello.
The government here has such a medieval view towards Omnics.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attackers incoming. Defend objective A.
Repairing the damage. I cast this forth. Allow me to repair the damage. I require assistance.
Enemies in orbit.
Predictable. This will heal you. The power of destruction.
Barrier in place.
No one can hide from my sight.
Allow me. Now ready. This is my will. I need healing. Surrender to my will. Get into position. Restore. The power of destruction.
60 seconds remaining.
This is my will.
No one can hide from my sight.
This will improve your condition.
Objective lost.
When faced
Stop
with a
the
setback,
payload.
we must challenge our assumptions. My will made real. Such a flawed creation. Help me! This will heal you. Tell me how this feels. Surrender to my will. Universe broken.
Heroes never die.
Barriers unstable. Serve the best.
I'm not dead yet.
Online.
My ultimate is ready.
Shohei Mahol. Your strength fades. I'm restored. This is my will. 60 seconds.
Ready.
Allow me to I'm not dead yet.
The payload has reached the checkpoint.
Touch from afar.
Hello. Everybody come over here.
I'm restoring you. Shohei Mahol. This will heal you. Surrender to my will. Огонь по готовности! That's much
Defeat. Play of the game.
Sing for me! Impact!
Saccharomyces, and Saccharomyces means the sugar yeast or the sugar fungus. It consumes sugar, gives off alcohol, and that's the thing that it does. It does it everywhere in the natural world, including in our beer. When you add the yeast, it starts to reproduce. And it reproduces by budding, so you have like one yeast cell here and another one starts to grow out of it. And this happens over and over again until you have a full population of yeast. Now, when the fermentation is finished, usually we'll cool the tank down and the yeast will drop to the bottom. At that point, you can remove the yeast and store it for later use. You can't store it forever, but you can easily store it for a week or more, and you gotta keep them healthy because basically, when you're a brewer, that yeast is your partner. We like to joke that
Whether you're making a recipe for cinnamon rolls or French bread, yeast factors into the equation.
that do the same job as the variety we all know and love. The yeast and molasses are mixed together in a variety of food products as well. Lactobacillus brevis is used for cheese and yogurt, and Brettanomyces lambicus may be used in brewing to specifically produce sour varieties of beer. Yeast doesn't make its way to your local supermarket without some work. According to Quartz, on a large manufacturing scale, yeast and molasses are mixed together and fed a ridiculous amount of sugar to keep it happy and growing. Once that sugar is consumed and fermented, the solid and liquid byproducts are separated, and the yeast is dried out. That dried out powder is what we've become accustomed to purchasing in the store, and manufacturers package it in a way that makes it shelf stable. Because of that manufacturing process, some yeast varieties need a little waking up. Instant yeast is ready to rock straight out of the package, but active dry yeast must be activated before use. Sprinkle it in warm water before adding in any other ingredients in your baking project, and check the package to make sure which one you have. Yeast is mostly known for its role in baking bread, but it also plays a big role in the production of alcoholic drinks. That's right, you can thank yeast for your buzz. In beer brewing, yeast is added to the wort, the mash that's made from malted grains like barley.
Traveling to Dorado. Prepare your defenses. Select your hero.
Well, it's high noon somewhere in the world.
Attackers incoming in 30 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attackers incoming.
Through the dragon's eyes.
Stop the payload. Enemy contact.
Activating the barrier.
Touch from afar. Allow me to repair the damage. Allow me. Watch your back. Help me. I can't this force. I need healing. I need to recharge. Get into position. Perhaps a new methodology is required. This will improve your condition.
The payload has reached the checkpoint.
Marked by the dragon.
Perhaps a new methodology is required.
Personne n'échappe à mon regard.
My will made real. This is my will.
My ultimate is free shot. Get in there.
Group up here. Observe the battle.
I'm under attack. That's much better. Allow me to repair the damage. This will heal you.
Sniper ahead.
This will restore you. Evolution works quickly today. I'm restoring you.
Stop the payload.
That changes my thinking.
Nanoboost at minute.
Get into position. Allow me to repair the damage. Regenerating the cellular structure. I require healing.
Which is unseen.
This will restore you.
Let the dragon consume you!
I'm restoring you. Surrender to my will.
Experiment is ready. Time for a finish up.
Regenerating the cellular structure.
Need healing.
Thank you. Activating the barrier. Getting that seed. Nanoboost is ready to destroy.
I need healing.
Experiment is ready. Time for a finish up.
What is the melody?
New beginning. New thinking.
Genji is with you.
Need healing.
Rendezvous at my position.
Need healing.
Weapon at my position.
I cast this force.
60 seconds remaining.
See.
This will restore you.
The payload has reached the checkpoint.
There was a flaw in my approach. Touch from afar. Surrender to my will.
Elementary application.
This is my will.
Activating the barrier.
This will improve your condition. I will unmake you. Allow me to repair this.
Personne n'échappe à mon regard.
You guys are breathing.
That changes my thinking.
60 seconds remaining.
Nanoboost is ready. Get in there, and I'll hit you.
I cast this forth. I will rebuild you. I will draw the strength from your body.
Let the dragon come
The power of destruction.
30 seconds remaining.
Faced with a setback, we must challenge our assumptions.
10 seconds remaining.
Touch from afar.
What is that melody? Sing for
Surrender to my will.
Round 1 complete. Score 0-2. Switching sides. Prepare to attack. Select your hero.
Science will reveal the truth. Get here.
Attack commences in 30 seconds.
I always thought you would understand better than most the duality of human existence.
I am at peace with it. I suspect you will be forever unsatisfied.
Thank you.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attack commencing.
We must ensure the payload's progress.
Escort the payload.
Hila, I'm restoring you.
Need healing.
My position. Get into position. I need to recharge. Restoring you. The power of destruction. Allow me to repair the damage. My will made real.
The payload has reached the checkpoint.
Assemble at this location.
The payload.
Move it out. Touch from afar. This will restore you.
Walk it off.
Need healing.
The payload moves with certainty. This will heal you. Your contributions to the Get into position. I will rebuild you. Allow me to repair the damage. Not yet. This is my will. Surrender to my will.
I require healing.
The payload has reached
I'm on
the checkpoint.
fire.
My will made real. Boy, careful with the arm.
Experiment is ready. Time for a dramatic plunge.
Aim a hole.
Victory. Play of the game. Double kill. Now entering the temple. Prepare your defenses. Select your hero.
Let's bring it together.
I'm in aim.
Get up!
Boom! Oh, yeah!
Attackers incoming in 30 seconds.
Enough waiting around.
Let's shoot for a new high score!
Feel the healing beat!
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attackers incoming. Defend objective A.
Look at the beat! Backed up. Oh, let's break it! Damn! Up the tempo!
Get
No one can hide from my sight.
Check this out. Patched up.
Objective lost. New defense point. Objective B.
Feel the healing. This is my jam. You feel that? I got an enemy turret destroyed.
Oh, let's break it! Damn!
Push on. Nothing's gonna happen. Push on. Oh, turn it up. I am on fire. Yeah, time to heal up.
Enemy turret destroyed.
I need healing. Let's up the tempo.
Thank you.
Oh, this is my jam.
Cease your resistance.
Stay down. Tactical visor activated.
Speed boost.
Oh, let's break it! Damn!
This is gonna make you feel better. I am on fire.
Enemy turret sighted.
Hello there.
Enemy turret destroyed. Enemy turret destroyed.
Oh, turn it up.
We're overwhelming.
Check this out.
Nano boost almost ready.
60 seconds remaining.
Nothing's gonna stop.
Meteor strike.
Yeah, let's move it, people. Oh, yeah.
Enemies re-engaging.
10 seconds remaining.
Pull it together, team. We got this.
Oh, let's break it. Raising the volume. Push on.
Round 1 complete. Score 0-1. Switching sides. Prepare to attack. Select your hero.
Come on, let's bring it together.
Feels good to be here.
Attack commences in 30 seconds.
Oh, enough waiting around. Let's get out there. Oh, yeah!
All systems operational. Diva, ready for combat.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Science will reveal the truth.
Attack commencing. Capture objective A.
I cast this force. My condition is improved. I will draw the strength from your body. The power of destruction.
I'm claiming this objective.
This will improve your condition. This will heal you.
Doesn't bother us anymore.
Taking the objective. Support requested. Ahlan?
Stupidity is not a right. I'm on fire.
Operating at optimal
It'd be
levels.
wise to stay out of my sight.
Objective A captured. Commence attack on objective B.
Land on Moira, land on Moira, land on Moira!
Activating self-destruct sequence.
Such a blow.
Hello there.
Perhaps a new methodology is required.
Thank you.
Touch from afar.
Help me!
Not gonna bother us anymore.
Heal up.
My will made real. Walk the dog. Surrender to my will.
Double.
This will restore you.
Victory.
Stupidity is not a right.
Play of the game.
Begins the process of fermentation. The yeast begins to consume the sugar in the wort and converts it into ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. It's responsible for the alcohol content in beer as well as its carbonation. Yeast plays a role in making wine too. It's found on the skins of grapes, which makes its way into the fermenter during the winemaking process. Wild yeast strains consume the sugars in the grapes, ultimately creating alcohol. Winemakers help the process along by adding commercial strains of yeast, and each strain adds a different flavor to the finished wine. So yeast can be the cause of hangovers. It can also be the cure. According to Jim Cook, co-founder of Samuel Adams Beer, mixing a bit of dry yeast with yogurt before a night of drinking is the ideal way to alleviate your headache the next day. Because yeast breaks down alcohol, the alcohol in what you're consuming may be broken down before being absorbed into your bloodstream. Smells evoke feelings. The smell of freshly baked bread can definitely inspire nostalgia for your grandmother or mother baking bread in the kitchen.
What's that? What? That smell. What's that smell? What smell? It's very familiar. I can't put my finger on it. It's very familiar.
Next time you're thinking back to the old days, remember that the comforting smell of freshly baked bread isn't just coming from the baking process itself. It has everything to do with yeast. As the yeast in the dough is feeding on the sugars found in flour, carbon dioxide is being released to make that dough rise and create those incredible aromas we love along the way. During the fermentation process, a number of compounds are produced, and we can thank these compounds for the delicious smell and flavor of bread. The more time a dough spends fermenting, along with a higher amount of yeast used in the dough, ultimately the higher the concentration of aromatic compounds. Pulling off a great loaf of homemade bread can be a challenge. After all, you have to get your ingredients just right, along with your mixing and even your rise times. There's a lot of science that goes into baking the perfect loaf. As you're looking at how much flour to add or how much sugar and salt, remember that one of the most important ingredients to get exactly right is yeast. If you add too much yeast to your dough, it may end up producing more volume than intended. A dough can increase in size too much, which ultimately leaves holes in the end product. At the same time, if there's excess yeast creating too much of a rise, your loaf has the potential to completely collapse in the oven. On the other hand, if you don't include enough yeast, you may end up with bread that's a bit too heavy, with a tough texture because there wasn't enough development of carbon dioxide. If you find yourself in a pinch and you're out of yeast at home, there are yeast substitutes and ways of skipping yeast altogether. You might want to consider making a loaf of Irish soda bread, which is typically served with thicker slices, as it's a bit more crumbly than your typical loaf. That texture comes from the omission of yeast. A typical Irish soda bread recipe will employ baking soda rather than yeast as its leavening agent. If you're still set on a recipe that calls for yeast, you can opt for a substitute that mimics what yeast will do. You can substitute an equal amount of double-acting baking powder, for example.
Traveling to Route 66. Prepare to attack. Select your hero.
Science will reveal the truth.
Attack commences in 30 seconds.
Nothing to worry about, unless there's something to worry about, as Dr. Liao always said.
Hello.
Must violence always be the solution?
Greetings.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attack commences. Escort the main.
Ensure the payload's progress.
Minimize errors. Adapt to changing battlefield conditions.
I cast this forward. Injured again. Touch from afar. This will heal you. Bitch in a book. I need healing. Surrender to my will. Thank you for your contributions.
Experiment is ready. Time for a prophetic flux.
Let me get you past that. Damage boost engaged.
I am optimized.
Enemy target located.
The wolf hunts for its prey!
Changing position.
Allow me to repair the damage.
The payload
I
has
will
reached
allow
the
none
chip.
to stand in the way of progress. This will heal you. I cast this forward.
Double kill.
Systems on fire.
It's time for a prophetic flux.
This is my will.
My ultimate is fully charged. Get ready.
Barrier in place.
Activating Winston.
The power of the force. I need healing. You seem in need of aid.
I'm dispatched.
Strength fades.
Payload progresses. Excellent.
dead yet.
Excellent.
I cast this forth.
Experiment is ready. Time for a grouping.
Surrender to my will.
Focus with me. The payload has reached the chip.
Hello. Healing stream engaged.
I need a help restore.
Thank you. Get into position. Strength flows from me. I require assistance.
What is that melody?
Not yet. Become powerless. This is my will.
Executing flight plans.
Fully charged. Get ready.
Restoring me. Allow cover air damage.
Heroes never die.
I need to recharge. The power of destruction.
Personne n'échappe à mon regard.
I require healing. I require healing. I require healing. Get into position. Strength flows from me.
Payload in motion. Stays in.
Damage increase.
Welcome improvement.
Hi.
This will restore you. Your power is mine.
I'm on fire.
Got it.
It's time for a great
Surrender to my will. Allow me to repair the damage. Perhaps a new methodology is required. Become paralyzed.
Damage.
Get into position.
Personne n'échappe à mon regard.
This will restore you.
Heroes never die.
This will heal you. Tell me how this feels. Calm yourself. Your strength will fade.
30 seconds remaining.
My will made real.
Step right up.
Round 1 complete. Score 3-0. Switching sides. Prepare your defenses. Select your hero.
Silence. Science
Damage
will
boost
reveal the
engaged.
truth. A welcome improvement. I know we have our differences, but your brilliant mind would be welcome amongst my colleagues in Oasis.
No, thank you. You and your colleagues discredit the field of science. I want nothing to do with it.
Hello.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attackers incoming. Stop the payload.
Observe the barrier.
Get into position. Science saved the day. Again.
Barrier is unstable.
Help me. This will heal you. I will draw the strength from your body. Allow me to repair the damage.
Activating the barrier. Almost time.
Get into position. Surrender to my will. With it. Perhaps a new methodology is required.
Step Rider.
I require healing. Sniper! This will heal you. Touch from afar.
You have my thanks.
This will improve your condition.
Heroes never die.
Surrender to my will. I require assistance. My keen analytical mind.
Engaged. Roadhog.
Thank you.
New beginning. New thinking.
The lead doctor.
I pass this forward. Injured again. Allow me to repair the damage.
Step Rider.
The power of destruction. Regenerate the cellular structure. Best in the shadows.
Double.
I'm on fire!
Shohei Mahol. This is my will. Get into position. We must all make
Team
sacrifices in the name of science.
Greetings.
Touch from afar.
No!
Injured again. Surrender to my will.
60 seconds remaining.
We must all make
Right
sacrifices in the name of science.
The payload has reached the checkpoint.
The power of destruction.
Personne n'échappe à mon regard.
This
Enemy seen.
This is my will. Restoring me. Our body decays.
Activating self-destruct sequence!
Its destination.
This will restore you.
Der Kampf ist noch nicht vorbei.
60 seconds remaining.
This will heal you.
Thank you.
Touch from afar. I am ready to unleash coalescence.
Thank you.
I cast this forth.
10 seconds.
Personne n'échappe à mon regard.
Thank you.
Surrender to my will.
Routing power forward.
Even angry.
I must reflect upon this.
I will prove myself. Let us know. My barrier testing. Not your time. I got you.
Round 2 complete. Score 3-3. Prepare your defenses. Select your hero.
Science Science will reveal the truth.
You were one, sir.
Attackers incoming in 30 seconds.
Hey.
It's luck. All about luck.
Damage increase.
Korean Bert Boher.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 60 seconds remaining. Stop the payload.
Switching to combat readiness.
Touch from afar. Seamen need of aid.
I got it.
Your power is mine.
30 seconds remaining.
Get into position.
10 seconds remaining.
I must reflect upon this. This is my will.
Widowmaker here.
The payload has reached the checkpoint.
Time restored.
Sensing a start for perpetual flux.
My will made real.
Healing stream engaged. Helden sterben nicht.
What is that melody?
I'm under. Surrender to my will. Mercy is for the weak. Heroes never die. From afar.
Round 3 complete. Score 3-4. Switching sides. Prepare to attack. Select your hero.
Science will reveal the truth.
My ultimate is chop.
I can't wait to get into the fight.
Attack commences in 30 seconds.
All right, game face on.
Hello.
Let's shoot for a new high score.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Attack commencing. Escort the payload progress.
Let's get you back out there.
Here comes Harula. I require healing. I need to recharge.
60 seconds remaining.
I will rebuild you.
seconds remaining.
Pick up the pace. We can do this.
My ultimate is charging.
Time to the ledge.
Ready.
Mahal.
10 seconds remaining. Defeat.
Meteor strike.
Play of the game. Double
to their mark.
Oh, I'm done, man. I think that Hansel is cheating. Leading silver. GG. Cooking stream.